Scent Podcast.
Okay, we're live. This is Matthew, and I'm coming back with another spotlight interview with an incredible creator. The creator that I'm speaking with today is a talented graphic designer. They've been posting on Scent for the past few months, and their print work really caught my eye, both for some of the more conspicuous eye-catching colors, but also for a lot of the more muted work that really draws the viewer in. And as soon as I noted that this particular creator has been working in the advertising industry for 20 years, I felt like I really wanted to dig into the professional history and then how that relates to the creative work that they're sharing on Scent. So I'm really honored to be able to have the opportunity to speak with the creator who goes by Headplant on Scent, but is also known as Kevin. So welcome to the spotlight, Kevin.
Hello world. Nice to be here. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah. And to get started, tell us about yourself and tell the world what you do. I think that would be a great way to get started. And then we can dive more into your creative work and your professional history and all that good stuff.
Sure. How I introduce myself, it's always interesting because there's lots of, as you noted, I have both professional and personal things, but I would say that I am by trade, as you said, a graphic designer / art director. I've worked in advertising, as you said, for 20 years, mostly on the art side. I do some copywriting, but that's really not my specialty. I've worked on big brands, anywhere from Adobe all the way through to smaller brands like Ghirardelli chocolate, and I've worked on some coffee brands like Noe Valley Coffee, which is a local San Francisco coffee bean roaster, and I'm a father of a 18-year-old son. I think that's it. I'm sure more will come out as we talk.
Totally. There's probably a few different avenues we can go down, but I'm always curious to hear the creative journey of the people who are on Scent. Yeah, just kind of take us from when you got that first creative impulse or creative bug to start making things until today.
Yeah, that's a long journey. I don't know if we have time to go through the whole journey, but I don't think I was, from very young, I don't think I was super interested, but I would say probably in, as from 10 to, from 10 years old on, I always was very interested in art. Probably when I was younger, more interested in viewing art than I was in creating art. And then I went to college and I took some art classes. In high school, I was very interested in ceramics, and I did a lot of ceramic work. And then in college, I did my college degree is not in art. My college degree is in anthropology, psychology, and religion. But I did do art in college. And then after college, I took some graphic design courses at a local, I used to live in LA, at a local community college in Santa Monica. And then from there, I got a job working as a art director. And so I think there was a period of time where I didn't do a lot of art because I was so focused on my career. That was probably, I would say that was a good maybe 10 or 15 years, maybe 10. And then I started to get into photography. And then I started to get into art again as a extension of what I was doing professionally. I think in advertising, you learn some quickly, some not so quickly. I might be one of the ones that wasn't so quickly. That, in advertising, you have these ideas and you put them out into the world. And once they're out in the world, they're no longer yours, right? Because there's a team of people and there's influences and people make the ideas better. and so then it's not your idea anymore. And I think when you have to be comfortable in that atmosphere that the idea was yours, or the seed of the idea was yours. But that once you've put that seed out into the world, that it's no longer yours. You don't own that idea any longer. And I think as I came to that resolution, I realized that I wanted to do something where it was my own. And that's when I started doing some photography work, and that turned into the graphic design work that you can see on Scent. So that's kind of the progression, or the journey, I think, is that it was really a realization that, I wanted my own, something that that was my own expression that I could put out into the world, and I owned it.
That's nice. I always love the title art director, because it's a great name, number one. And I never know what exactly it means. And it seems to kind of change from context to context. Like, speaking with someone who was an art director at Apple on a particular product, they just need to make sure, not just, that's like a huge endeavor, but to make sure that there's continuity throughout campaigns, like throughout the world. Like, it's really interesting what goes into that particular title. So I'm curious, in the work that you were doing in advertising as an art director, like, what exactly did you do there? Because I'm curious how that kind of may have influenced some of your personal creations and graphic design later on.
Sure. So, I think I've been in the business long enough that I feel like it's changed a little bit. I mean, it hasn't changed drastically, but there was a period of time, and I agree with you. It's interesting because I think when you say art director, and I always used to just assume that everyone knew what an art director was. But I think it's confusing because not everyone knows what an art director is, but then also in different industries, art director means a different thing, right? So like in advertising nowadays, an art director is someone who helps with the idea, and then visually brings that idea to life. And typically you work with a copywriter who writes the words. So it's together you're creating ideas, and then you go off pretty much separately, and your partner works on the word part, and you work on the visual part of the idea. So that's what, I spent a large part of my career doing. And then as you progress through the ranks and you get more senior, I think you have a tendency to not have to do as much of the hands-on, and you're more directing of other people. And the other thing I think about a lot too is, you use the term graphic designer, which has a whole set of other things that people do that's graphic design. But I always think of it as there's people who are graphic designers. My wife is a graphic designer. And I think the difference between a graphic designer and an art director is an art director has an idea. And then nowadays, some art directors need to then, I would say most, need to be able to kind of finish that idea. But a designer is someone who may not be as interested in the idea part, but they're more interested in taking that idea and making it look really beautiful. And so I have the ability to make things beautiful, but I think I tend to focus on the idea and making that beautiful. And then it's always nice to be able to have someone, in a professional instance, have someone be able to help you finish that idea visually. So that kind of, I don't know if that answered the question exactly, but I think it gives you a little bit of an impression of how I view art direction.
Totally. And it kind of feeds into the other part that I was curious about. So like, how does your professional experience flow into what you're doing on a personal level creatively? Like with some of the work that you've shared on Scent, is there any element of professional Kevin that is woven into some of the mixed media work here? Or if there's no professional Kevin, like what part of yourself is in the work that you've shared, at least on set.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I mean, I guess I'd be lying if I didn't say there's some part of professional Kevin in the work I've shared on set. I don't know if there's a line that you could draw and say, I see that. I see that piece came from my professional view. But definitely, I think, um, for me, a lot of why I'm creating, and it's interesting because it started out, this path that I'm on right now started out actually as a warm-up exercise, where I was in the morning to get started. I had a bunch of photography that I'd taken, and I had these shapes that I had, and I wanted to play around with color. So I brought all that stuff together and started playing, but it was a very quick exercise where every morning I would start and I'd give myself 30 minutes and I would just play, right, to kind of get myself started. And so that's how it started. And then from there, I started liking what I was doing. And I started feeling like there was something there, that combination of photography and shapes, and all the shapes that I use are shapes. Well, I wouldn't say just from nature, but they're found in the world. Sometimes it's a plant shape or a flower shape, and sometimes it's a fence, or I didn't use like a crosswalk kind of pattern, but it's all something that I found in the world to combine. So it's really that combination of having those shapes and that beauty in the shape and the color, and then having something behind it that is, maybe to me it's the world, right? Because there is, not that, sometimes I think you can see it, sometimes you can't. There's stuff behind there that is being obscured by nature in a sense. So, and those all have meaning. And I usually, when I name a piece, the name of the piece, I try and make it represent the photography, not necessarily what's in front of the photography.
Super interesting. And it's that layered nature of the pieces that you share that really, I love. I can't get enough of that stuff. You look at like the color that catches you, and then you're like, hold on, what's going on in the background? And especially with your work, you really have to look close. And it's interesting because you have the title, you have the work, and boom, that's it. Like, you leave the rest up to the viewer, which, I mean, I don't know if dangerous is the right word. Because looking at many of your pieces, there's almost like a Rorschach nature to them.
Yeah.
Like, the viewer sees almost what they want to see. Just to give our listeners an example, there's an earlier work that you shared. The title is Burning. And I'm just going to describe like what I see from my contextual place in the world and time. Like, in the middle, the shadow figure who's wearing a hat looks like a Confucian scholar from Korea in the past. And the ground, it looks like this Braille sidewalk, like metro platforms, or at the edge of a road before you go into the street. Like, it's there for people to stop. So I'm seeing like these very like Asian images and associations in some of your work, but it speaks to the multi-layered nature of what you've created and how it pulls the viewer in and leaves a lot of interpretation up to them. But it's really fascinating and beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I really like that you say that. There's an artist, and I can't remember the artist's name now, but they were talking about that notion of, that an artist creates art for themselves, but that it's similar to what I was talking about before, that once you put it out into the world, like you have an interpretation of what that means to you, but then the viewer has an interpretation of what that means to them, right? Contextually, like you said, that it felt like it was Confucius and there was an Asian feel to it. I would have never seen that. And that wasn't intended, but at the same time, that's beautiful, right? Because it gave you brought something to the piece, and it gave you a feeling, and to me, that's the beautiful part, right? That I was able to create something that I was expressing, but then you have the interpretation of how you view it. So I don't know, that part is really beautiful to me because it feels like, then you're engaging and everyone has a perspective, which, not to get into where we are in the world, but I feel like that's lacking in the world, the ability to have that, just to allow people to have their impressions and be okay with that, right? Like that's beautiful that you would come away with that feeling, even if that may not be what I intended.
Totally. And it's conversations like this where I listen to your intent and especially the nature elements, like the plants and like the parts of the image that are at the forefront or most conspicuous. Listening to your description there, it's like, okay. It reframes how I see it too. So it's like this really interesting feedback loop of like interpretation, hearing the original intent, looking back at it again, and seeing it almost anew for the first time. I just love this stuff. I feel like it's endlessly fascinating. And at the end of the day, we're talking about very beautiful things. And like you kind of brought it back to the real world where we are today. Like these sorts of exercises, if enough people engage in them, could be like quite beneficial and leave a really good impression on the rest of society and leave us just a little bit better off than we were the other day. But my next question is like almost totally unrelated to that. And it has to do with like the fact that you are posting and sharing on Scent. And because Scent is powered by like blockchain enabled tools, and there are a lot of other creators who are utilizing crypto powered tools to like mint their work and turn their digital images into a digitally scarce asset. I'm curious, like, do you have any particular reason for why you started to share on Scent? And like, do you have any interest in tokenizing any of your work and utilizing any of these like NFT marketplaces to distribute any of the creations that you're making? Curious about that side.
How I came to Scent, before we started, I was trying to think of, I figured that was going to come up, and I was trying to remember how I found Scent. It must have been an email that I had, or it might have been an article I read where they were talking about Scent and giving artists the ability to own their art. And that's how I discovered it. And it wasn't because of the blockchain. It was more, I think it was like a comparison between either like Patron or OnlyFans or some, one of those other sites that does something similar to that. But it was interesting that, Scent said that it was about giving ownership. So that's why I tried it. And it's been interesting to see the reactions for sure. And then I've done a little more research. I don't know that I'm ready yet to do the limited edition stuff, but that's something that I'm definitely investigating and thinking about for sure. I feel like there's a little bit of a learning curve that goes on with that. And so I'm on the beginning of that journey for sure.
And I think this is really interesting because you haven't yet started that tokenized, that limited edition making journey. So from your perspective at this point, before you've done all that, like what is confusing to you? What are you unsure about? What's exciting to you? Just kind of like from your perspective about the NFT situation and limited edition digital art. From your perspective, I think that's super helpful for other people that are obviously like more people are in your position than are in this space, right? So.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's. I think there's a. If I understand it correctly, and I may again because I'm just on the beginning of the journey. I I feel like there's a couple places you can do that, and I have to do the research to figure that out. So I think that's probably the biggest hurdle. In terms of tokenizing, I think that feels like a really interesting idea. I know it's. I think because of the blockchain, it's something that's new for online, but it's something that in offline, there's obviously people that have been doing that for a long time. There's the shepherd fairies of the world who have the limited edition prints that they sell, right? So it's interesting. I think that's the interesting part about it to me is that I'm not a shepherd fairy. I can't create. I don't have the following of shepherd fairy. I don't, but I could create limited art that's digital. So I think that's the exciting part about it to me is that ability to be a little bit like the offline world.
Hmm. Could you dig into that a little bit more? Like, how do you see that offline world, and what are the barriers? I mean, is the barrier just like a limited following in the offline world? Like, what prevents you from doing that in the offline world
I think,
versus the potential here?
yeah, I think it's a little bit following, and then I think it's also the tools, right? You would need it if you're going to do. You would have to figure out how you were going to do your prints, and where you were going to get them, and how you're going to print them. I mean, if you look at Shepard Fairey's work, and he's not the only one, but he's the one that comes to mind for me. It's a much he has a very kind of print ready style, if you will. So I think you can do prints much easier. And so I think to me that's the barrier. For me is one, the biggest barrier I think is the following, right? Is you want people to buy your work, and you don't want to create 50 prints and then have them sitting in your house. And then the other is I don't know that my work lends itself to that type of printing. I'd have to, I think I'd have to do more investigation into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about your work in particular, but a lot of graphic design too, that there's a lot of details. And I mean, it's great to be able to zoom in on them on a monitor, right? And look close.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I think you could still do that if you printed it, but I think it would be different. I think it's as you said, it's back to what we were talking about earlier, that notion of perspective, right? Is that if you put it on the wall, it's going to have a different feel than if you look at it online, right? And maybe there's something about my work where it feels like you want to dig into it in a way that you might not be able to if you put it on a wall. I'm not sure. Again, I think it would be something you'd have to play with, and you'd have to print it out and see what came of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting, I guess, potentials of the NFT and like rare digital art space is just how it, like those barriers that you mentioned in the real world, either like the limited real world following, maybe issue with tooling, distribution, just like logistics, and like all of that. It's almost kind of all of those barriers are almost disappeared when it comes over here. Yeah, you need to decide which platform is best for you. Like, do you want to go super rare where it's only focused on these one of one super rare editions, or a site like Known Origin, which is more flexible for the artist, but it's still whitelisted. So there's definitely like a focus on like some sort of qualitative screening, or like a Rarible, which is like open for everyone to do whatever they want to do. It's a varying effects and controversy and interesting stuff like that, right? So outside of that, though, it's like, okay, everyone has a Twitter, everyone can sign up to any of these like social platforms to start spreading their work and talking about it, and the barriers to access are so much lower. and it seems like there's just like a such a large number of folks who have dabbled in graphic design or are familiar with like digital tools to create, right? And then whereas in the past, like they've had to take those talents, those skills, and kind of work for a larger enterprise
Right.
to create. But like you mentioned, like those creations are never really theirs. It's like the companies and the teams and whatnot. Now it's sort of like, okay, the creators can actually create for them again. It's like this creator centric like space all of a sudden that popped up out of nowhere, and people are just kind of finding out and getting excited about for the first time. And seeing the growth over the past couple of years, it's been like, whoa, there's definitely something here in this creator crypto space. So it's always interesting to see where people are in their understanding and interpretation of what's happening in this neck of the woods.
No, and I think like you said, I think it gives access to people that wouldn't normally have access, right? I think that's the exciting part, is that, if you, as we were talking about, you're not everyone's a shepherd fairy, right? And so when you democratize the access and the ability, right, that you have more people that are doing it, and you have people that, you might have never seen my work had it not been for it being on Syn, right? I mean, that you found a new artist because of Syn. So I know that part is exciting and interesting, I think, and it can be frustrating too. I think, I think some people embrace the idea of creative culture and support other creators, and I think other people, maybe on the older side, I'm on the older side, but on the older side, feel like, that they're lost in the sea of people, right? And it's hard to get noticed. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I think that last point is really important, because there's a bit of being very early into like a burgeoning space right now, where I feel like those sorts of fears are a little bit diminished for right now. But if like what's happening at this point in time plays out over a longer time horizon, and more people start to create in this space, or start to create at least with these tools, and like various spaces unfold within this sort of like creator crypto area, then that same issue comes up. It's like, well, how do I compete with like billions of people or hundreds of millions of other creators? Like, how do I actually stand out? And but again, it's almost like the same thing in real life, right? So there's some prominent people, some people make it, and everyone has their own creative journey. And I don't know, it's sort of like an anxiety of life. Like, how do I make it? how do I do my own thing in a way that is like sort of successful? It helps me enable me to keep doing it. So I'm wondering if like that the anxiety of like getting lost in a million people, I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of let folks know it's not about like making it, but it's like allowing you to just keep doing what you like to do. So because of, you don't need to have the whole world like you, as long as you're able to get a few fans that support you. And since like this digital art and crypto lets folks monetarily support, it's not just like liking you on Facebook or Twitter, which is valueless. Like, people are actually able to exchange value for what they value your work at. And as long as that happens, and I think anyone is capable of doing that, regardless of how many people are aware of them, I feel like that will start to change and alleviate maybe some of that anxiety about getting lost in the sea of creators, or lost in this mass of folks in the area or in the space. I'm not sure though. Obviously, time will tell.
And I think, though, I think you hit on, excuse me, I think you hit on some really good points. I feel like, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, is for me, because this is my art and not necessarily how I make my paycheck. I mean, it'd be nice if someday this was how I made my paycheck. But I think as an artist, it's about me expressing myself, right? and doing what I want to do, and that should be enough. And then if you're so lucky to have people to start to like it, and then that starts a momentum. I think that, to me, that's an added benefit, right? Because I got the ability to create what I wanted to create, how I wanted to create it, and put that out into the world. And that is I think a luxury that not everyone has. And so to me, that's the biggest thing for creators to remember, right? Is that you're creating, you have the ability to create the things you want to create. And if you get more than that, that's icing on the cake. I mean, that's what I would say to other creators, is that it's really about your ideas and getting those out into the world, and anything after that is great, but also not the end goal.
I love that. I love framing it as a luxury, and it's a luxury that everyone potentially has access to. Everything that happens after being able to engage in that creative expression, that luxury of creative expression, it really is like, okay, it works. That's fantastic. But the big thing is that being able to have that creative expression.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. I love that framing, actually. I never thought about that. It's sort of been like right there. But focusing on that is fantastic. And then because of that, you're able to be exposed to, like you said, like so many other fantastic creators. Like,
yes,
obviously, since I'm talking to you, you're a great example. But then going around the world, even like looking at, there's an artist from Nigeria by the name of Oshinachi. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they've been creating art using Microsoft Word. And
yeah, I think I've heard of it. Yes, I think
yeah. And because of these tools that they now have available, they've been able to share it around the world. And they've been able, I mean, they got a lot of icing on their cake, to take that metaphor even further, because people view their work and they're like, oh my God, that is amazing. I've never seen anything like that. The story is fantastic. And now they have like a growing following. They have increased global presence. Like it's fantastic to see what can happen. And talking about the icing on the cake is definitely exciting, and I think brings people in here. But like, yeah, focusing on just the luxury to creatively express yourself. I feel like we can't say that enough. And I feel like real creators will get that. And that's probably the best thing that we can do for ourselves and for everyone in the space. I think.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think and it goes back to that notion of, once you put an idea out into the world, it's no longer yours. I think, if you get too caught up, and this is just adding to what you're saying, if you get too caught up in the, how do I make money from this, or people don't really like my work, I think that's an end. I mean, you can go down that path, but then is it really your work? Right? Because you've changed it and tailored it so much to make people like it. Was the goal to make people like it, or was the goal to create something that you wanted to put out in the world? You know what I mean? I think it's almost that old, you build it and they will come kind of thing. It's like, I think you have to do your thing. Mm-hmm. And then let the rest kind of take itself, let the rest handle itself. And if you keep putting it out there, I think you'll get noticed. I mean, obviously we're talking today because I continue to put stuff out. I think if I had 3 years ago, if I had not done that, I don't think I would still be doing what I'm doing. Right. Like, I think it would be different.
I mean, looking forward a little bit, like, where do you see your creative journey taking you over the next year or so into the future? I mean, do you have any ambitions? Do you have any experiments you'd like to run? Any projects you'd like to complete?
I think for sure I'm one of my ambitions is it's taking the time to do it, but is to do some of the limited edition work. That's something that I definitely would like to do in the next year. Um, and then, I'm always open to new stuff. I think I'm not sure where I'll go next. I feel like I've done a lot of this style now, and so it may be time to change it up a little bit. Um, and I've dabbled in that a little bit, but I haven't found anything um, that's kind of that feels like it's hit home yet. So I'm still playing around with that for sure.
Well, that'll be interesting to see what you do next. I always feel when I find a creator that is like doing something, like I like to frame it almost as experiments, experimenting with an approach, an idea, and you can see like the common thread through those series of experiments. When something new happens, like when they go into a different area or a new idea inspires them, I always love to watch how that plays out because usually you can see something of it in some other work, or I don't know, like if you know the artist, you can kind of like, okay, there's like a life event or something happened where it really triggered them in that area. I love the connectedness of everything and trying to string together how these new experiments or new styles kind of develop.
Yeah. And one of the things we didn't, I mean, I totally agree with you. One of the things we didn't talk about, which I feel like is a big part of this, part of the project that I'm doing now, is that there's a lot of serendipity that happens in my work. Um, and so I'm not sure that it's collecting, it's really collecting a bunch of stuff together and then creating something from a feeling. But sometimes there's, an unintended, like I'll put something together and it's like, I didn't intend that to happen, but it happened. Right. And there's something nice about that. And I'm not sure how I would translate into the next thing, but I really like that notion of putting things together and finding something that you didn't intend to have, if that makes sense.
Your work has this like collage like aspect to me, or collage like character to me. There's another creator on Scent by the name of Lucid House, very focused on this collage work style. And when they get into the creative mode, they just kind of throw things together and see what works. And serendipity plays a large role in what they end up creating, similar to yours. But the role of serendipity, I don't think can be understated in any creative endeavor, right? There's maybe like an idea that drives things forward, but at the end of the day, it's like it's like magic almost when things fall into place and like you see something and you go with it and then boom, you have what you end up posting. I just feel like that to me, like that is the magic of art and creation. And it's hard to put into words, and it's obviously different case to case, but I'm glad that you did bring that up. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, because I think, there's, especially with collage work, I think there is that, and I agree. My work is reminiscent of collage. And I'm actually looking at Lucid House's stuff right now, and I agree. It's somewhat similar, although he's a little more photorealistic, I think, than I am. Not that that's a bad thing in any way. I actually really like what he's doing. But yes, I can't say how much serendipity is so I think important, and I think sometimes people don't allow themselves um, the ability to take advantage of that, because you really have to be open to it, I think, and be willing to throw some things together. And sometimes it doesn't work out, right? And sometimes it does, and that's where the serendipity comes in. I don't know. I think it's definitely a skill that you have to develop.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, I always like to keep these conversations short and sweet, and also because time is really valuable, and you have a beautiful California night waiting for you right now. But before we go, I just want to give you the opportunity to share any last words, or if there's anything that you weren't able to talk about during our chat, leave the audience with that. And I think that'd be a great way to wrap things up.
I think the only thing I would say is, let's all keep creating, and that anyone who has any interest in corresponding and talking about creation, I'm always open to that. So thank you very much for this time and your thoughts and allowing me to express my thoughts, because it's always great to have that interaction. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And you took the words right out of my mouth. I always love to leave creators that I speak with that sentiment. Exactly, is just keep on creating. So I love how we're aligned there. But thank you so much for your time and taking the time out of your evening to talk with me about your work. Everyone definitely needs to go follow Headplant on Scent, and just keep on creating. Thank you very much.
Scent Podcast. Scent Podcast. Scent Podcast. Scent Podcast.